Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of the Self-Made Podcast. This one was a lot of fun. I had the pleasure of talking to Stephane Cazeault of Kilo Strength. If any of you don't know Stephane Cazeault, he is probably one of the most incredible programmers in terms of training that I've ever had the pleasure of talking to. The guy is a strength training wizard. He went from taking over the Poliquin group and being one of their head instructors to opening up his own facility, which is now soon to be moving to Miami. In this conversation, we talk about a little bit about what the traits that got him to the top of the industry, what he's learned from building Kilo, the thought process behind the move, and how he wants to help more coaches. We then delve into how we can help you bridge the gap between you right now and your long-term strength training goals, both from a mental perspective and a physical perspective. We break down the industry, we break down how to look at programming, and this is if you're into your training or if you want to get into your training. This interview is a fantastic place to start. If you don't follow Stephane, please go and follow him at Kilo Strength, at Stephane Cazeault on Instagram, and also his website where he has a number of programs, a number of books, including his 66 strategies to program design, which is well worth an investment for anyone looking for ideas of how to improve their own programming, whether it's the recreational trainee or the coach, as well as if you are the personal trainer and the coach or someone who wants to really learn about strength training, he has some phenomenal courses on offer. So enough of me, I'm going to leave you with myself and Stephane Cazeault. So for anyone who doesn't know you, which I think is pretty mad, give us an overview of who is Stephane Cazeault.
I'm born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And then I grew up there. And, over the years, when I was the age of 11, I started weight training and, that really tweaked my interest to a point where, honestly, when I was about 14, I kind of knew that I wanted to become a strength coach. So everything I did, academic wise, was in the goal of being a strength coach. So went to University of Montreal in exercise science, started working in a big commercial gym in Montreal, like one of those huge, 5,000 members, 35 personal trainers type of thing. And, once I graduated in 2000, I started doing a lot of continuing education. At that time, it was kind of just starting, you had Charles Poliquin, obviously, you had Ian King, Charlie Francis, John Berardi were starting out, Eric Serrano. And Charles Poliquin is probably the one that I related the most with. I really liked the scientific background to his training, which was very different than what you would read in typical bodybuilding magazine back in the day. So I started doing more and more courses with him. So in 2005, I was approached to go work in the United States and in St. Louis, Missouri, to train athletes. So I took the opportunity, moved there, started training athletes in a private high performance center. And at the time, it was one of the first ones, we had the strength coaches and then the chiropractors, and we did IV and all that kind of stuff under one roof. So it was a really cool experience. Then I started training NHL player, which is kind of my Canadian background to train hockey players, I guess. Evolved to the NFL, football, which is my favorite sport, and then Major League Baseball. And with baseball, what was interesting is in 2010, 11, and 12, I was hired as a high performance consultant. So I was not part of the actual staff, but I was consulting with them in terms of high performance. And what was cool for this is not only did I have about 10 or 12 players who were direct, they were my clients personally, but I was also in charge of writing the programs for the rest of the team and the farm teams as well. So we're talking about approximately 125 to 130 players. And that was very interesting to kind of get a foot into the pro world and see how they deal with it, the politics with the orthopedic surgeons, the athletic trainers, and on and on. Very, very cool experience. Then in 2012, Charles Poliquin approached me to go and work with him in Rhode Island. And Charles being kind of like my main influence in the field, I was kind of excited to go and work for his company. So I moved to Rhode Island, started working with Poliquin Group in September 2012. Then the whole thing happened with that company in August of 2013. Charles left the company, and it just became kind of weird. And in January 2016, I resigned from Poliquin Group and decided to start my own business. So I moved to Southern California to start Kilo. And what was interesting is, in my business plan, in my original business plan, I wanted to just be a group training facility. That's it. I was not going to do one-on-one. I was not going to do education, nothing like that. But as we know, things evolve, and I started getting a lot of demands for education. So I'm like, why not, start doing this as we're building our clientele in Southern California. So started doing continuing education, and then I really was motivated by it. Like, it was really cool. I really enjoyed it, and it started really growing and growing and growing to the point where when the whole COVID thing hit last year, our gym was closed for about 23 weeks. And at first we were closed from like March 17th all the way up to early June. Reopened early June, and then like early July, the governor said, "Okay, gyms have to shut down again." And that kind of was it for me. Like that, like at noon that day, it was a Monday at noon, the governor said gyms needs to shut down again. I was like fed up. That night, I booked a trip to Mexico. Went to Mexico with Kelsey and Alex, and we kind of used that time. We stayed there 2 weeks because there was no point coming back because we're still shut down, and kind of like brainstorm of, okay, what did the company become in the last 4 years? Our lease is up in 1 year. Our lease is actually up July 31st in a month or so. And we're like, let's think about this. What can we do and all that kind of stuff. And we just decided at that point that we wanted to shift our focus more towards the education and the online services. So then we started to look at, commercial real estate in Southern California. And we were like, you know what, like, why stay in the most expensive place in the country to do, online services? So we're like, like Miami sound interesting for us, especially knowing that the majority of our followers are East Coast US, East Coast Canada, Europe, which like Miami just becomes an easier access being on the East Coast. And of course, we wanted the sunshine and all. So Miami was just the right spot for us. So we made that decision, came to visit Miami November 2020, scoped the place around. And then about a month ago, we just moved here. And now we're in the process of finding a location, which is always harder than you think, especially now since everybody is flocking to Miami. So the inventory is a little less than it was in November when we came. But that's like our future, if you want, with the company. We really want to shift more towards online services, online education for strength coaches and personal trainers.
I think there's a number of things to impact in sort of your journey, and I think it's quite inspiring looking at how many like coaches, personal trainers, strength coaches that sort of when the lockdowns happened and the gyms shut, they sort of didn't know what to do, and a lot of them people may have let their clients sort of go, didn't, like you said, will pick back up when the gym's open, and other people sort of try to fumble around trying to find some sort of home training, where you took that as an opportunity to really like sort of revamp your business and the sort of the way Kilo works. And like, what is it you found about that second sort of gym closure that why do you feel that you took that as an opportunity to really set yourself apart rather than potentially rest on the laurels of the name that Kilo's already made?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those it was one of those things where obviously financials was a kind of an important driver in the sense that because the problem, what the government does not understand with the fitness industry when it comes to closure, it's like we're not like a restaurant where as soon as we open up, people are going to come back. The problem with the fitness industry, it's a momentum business. It's a luxury service. So when the gym is open and we have our members training in our facility with our unlimited membership and they're into it, they're training and training and training, it's all good and fine. They're loving it. But now we were closed like 23 weeks, so which is almost 6 months. During that time, what happens? People, they lose momentum with training. They're like, I'm done with training. Or they buy all the Peloton and the mirrors and the tonals and home gym equipment. So what happened is when we reopened, which was late September, when we were actually able to reopen, a ton of our members, they were like, well, I'm not going to renew. I got my stuff at home. I'm just going to stay at home. And the problem too for us, which was different than a lot of personal trainers, is us. We had a brick and mortar. We had an actual gym. So we kind of made a decision as a company to not provide online training for our clients during the lockdown, because to us, it was a very weird thing. We have like $200,000 worth of high-tech equipment in our gym. And then I'm going to tell you to pay me the same amount to write you a program at home to do with like a 120-pound kettlebell and a flat bench, and try to prove to you that it's going to be the same results as what you're doing when you're coming into our gym. So it was kind of like that weird thing where I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. Plus, to be quite honest, my entire career, I worked out of high level performance gym. So my imagination for at home training is nothing. I have zero imagination whatsoever. So I kind of suck at that anyways. So, for us, and then when we reopened, I mean, we lost like about 70% of our members. So that's why at the same time, we're like, you know what, if there was one time that it makes sense to just move and start over, is now, because it's not like we're pushing away like a ton of clients and all that kind of stuff, right? So it was kind of like that perfect moment for us to make the move. Plus, you still had, especially in California, you still had a certain percentage of people, even when we were reopened, that didn't feel comfortable coming back into a gym. So we're like, you know what, let's just move on and go towards what we actually are driven and motivated by anyways, because it was one of these things where, like the whole like saying like 80% of the time for 20% of the results. We're spending so much time on the gym part, but we were growing so much more in the education part. So we're like, if we can actually spend more time on that, it might actually be better in the long run anyways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was on a conversation with a guy called Sean Croxton recently for another episode, and he talks about like momentum is built with a moment, and I think you found this opportunity where, okay, here is the moment to start making that change and make that leap. And a lot of people may have like found reasons not to. They've got a fairly secure business despite the lockdown, and I think I agree. Looking at the career you've built, looking at the online training model for home training, like I'm sure that if you got into it, you would be able to come up with some great home programs. But like for me, it's like, it's not what I sort of know Stephane Cazeault for, and I wouldn't want to sort of like, one of the things I found when we've had 3 gym closures here in Hong Kong, and the clients that sort of didn't stick with their home training programs were the ones that tried to make the same as the gym but with the home equipment. So it's like, your A1 is your squat into your bench press, but instead of 8 reps, I'll do 50 reps. And it just doesn't feel right. And the people that adapted into, let's work on some of the strength leagues, let's work at some of the mobility, let's work at some of the stability stuff, let's work at your aerobic base. They're the ones that stuck at it and came back to the gym stronger. But like, as I say, if you're known for these incredible, and we'll get onto this, incredible long-term training programs, this is such a big derailing thing. And when you've got the business for trainers, just jump in with 2 feet, right? Yeah,
for sure, 100%.
So going back a little bit, there's a few things you mentioned there, which I think sort of sets you apart as a strength coach from a lot of people. And you mentioned the phenomenal facility you've got over there, and I do not envy you trying to move all of that equipment across. And I remember I recapped one of the old videos you did of like the tour of that you've got on YouTube, and the attention to detail on the kit is amazing. And I wonder if do you feel that's something that's I suppose this is a nature versus nurture argument, but do you feel like you've always had that attention to detail, which has pushed you down the path to become the strength coach you are? Or do you feel it's something you've gained as you've worked with people like Charles and Alex and all the people that you work with now?
Yeah, that's a great question, a great point. Like, because I think that's one of my biggest strength, like in that specific field. But to be honest, it's something I've had since like my entire life. I've always been extremely attentive to detail, always, like even when I was a kid, right? So I think it just carried on to what I'm doing right now, and why I've been successful in program design and periodization, because like from the get-go, as I started like being a trainer professionally at 21, I started gathering data, looking at data, analyzing data, keeping data the whole time, which is what I think allowed me to basically create the system that I have right now, that it's basically based off of my 23 whatever years in the field. So to me, that attention to detail, I think that it's probably one of my biggest trait for what I do by far, by far.
I think that comes across in the way you market. As I say, like it's, I've purchased so many of your templates, and I think your strength ratios book and poster, I have both of them currently in my house. So I did have it up, but we've recently moved a few things around for my engagement, so we've taken a few things down. But like, I think that really comes across, and I think I've always been quite mesmerized by. I remember I can't remember who the podcast was, where you mentioned that you're not only now being able to periodize year on year, but almost decade upon decade. And is that like, how long do you have like a bank of sort of program progressions now?
I mean, I like to work in 4-year blocks if you want.
Yeah.
But I have multiple 4-year blocks that builds onto the other 4-year block. So it's almost like I wouldn't say like infinite, but it's kind of like I can progress training for a while, but it's not like I technically have like a 40-year periodization model. It doesn't really work like that, but I could make it happen just based on the way I set up my training. And that's the thing, right? It's like I was very fortunate to have a few athletes that I trained their entire career. So we're talking about 12 years for most North American pro sports. And that to me is very important, because it allows you to see progress throughout, instead of like, peaks and drops and highs and lows. And but at the same time, the reason why I like to work in 4-year bracket is, although I was always one of those trainers that whenever I was training people one-on-one, I was one of those guys that I didn't have the most outgoing personality. It's not like I was that trainer in the gym that would attract a lot of people right away. But once I got someone, I typically would keep them forever until I moved or whatever. So I've had a lot of clients for 6, 7, 8 years type of deal. But I've noticed that on average, that 4-year bracket is like a good lifespan for a client usually, especially in the Gen Pop world. So if I have a client for 4 years, typically they're going to stick. After 4 years, either they move on to something else, they're triggered by yoga, let's say, or Pilates or hiking, and they just switch gears, right? So to me, I just like, why would I over plan for like the odd balls that are going to stick forever?
Yeah, I think it says a lot about your coaching, the fact that you look at the life cycle of a client in 4 years. When I've looked up, I've been on many business courses, coaching courses, and worked with many people where you're looking at average between like 6 to 12 months in terms of like a lot of trainers' life cycles. And I know that I wouldn't necessarily call myself up to 4 years yet, but I've been lucky enough to work with people 3, 4, 5 years, and probably my lifespan is probably between 18 months to 2 years probably on average. And like, I always remember looking at the conversations when people talk to my old employment about how to get client retention. A lot of people are like, okay, look at planning like when their last couple of sessions are and having these goals and knowing when their package ends. I was like, I don't think I'm not the most organized guy in the world. I don't have your organizational skill with you in numbers, but I think some of the things that got me by was one, always looking to better myself and always giving the client clarity, looking at I'm doing this now, maybe not for a month's time, but for this is why I want you to be in 4 months, 6 months, a year, so on and so forth. Do you think, what are the things you feel that's helped you keep clients for so long? Do you think it's giving them that clarity? What are the things that you feel that helps you keep clients so well?
I think that's a big part of it, because what I've noticed, and even as a manager, like in the facility I work with, when I was managing coaches, the I find that the industry tends to be reactive instead of, like they don't plan, they just react. In the sense, like so let's say they're on a program for a month, then the client asks for some different goal, then the trainer switches the goal, and then the trainer reads an article about a training method, then he switches that training method. So it's cool, it might be fun, quote unquote, for the client and for the trainer, but the training process doesn't work that way. The training process, it's a process. It needs to be calculated. It needs to be progressive. It needs to lead to something. And maybe it's because I've always had more of that sports performance background. It's almost like I think more as a Olympic coach in strength training programming than I do personal trainer. So like, for example, when I started in 99 at that gym in Montreal, out of 35 trainers, I was the only one who would have a clipboard, a stopwatch, a program that was written on paper. Most people, they would go through and just react. Oh, this machine is free today. Bam, let's do this. So to me, it's like, that's not planning. That's not training. Training needs a plan. It needs like anything, like martial arts, right? Like you don't start fighting black belts on your first, but somehow strength training, there didn't seem to be any type of true progression. So that's kind of like what shocked me early on, and I'm like, that's not how it should be. So by planning, by having a plan, not only are you showing the client that you're organized, that you're thoughtful, but at the same time, now they're understanding the process, they're understanding the steps, they're understanding it's not always a short-term reaction, and I find that they buy in a lot more. And at the same time, I guess that both my parents were professors, so I think I've always had kind of like a teaching, thing inside of me. So I always try to teach them and explain to them, I mean, to their level, like why are we taking long rest periods? Why aren't we just doing 10-second rest like everybody else in the gym? And then you explain, well, there's a metabolic system and there's a nervous system. The nervous system takes 5 to 6 times longer, and the nervous system allows you to recruit the proper motor unit, and blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, oh, okay, I get it. And then they buy into the rest period, right? Or, hey, how come we're not changing the exercise every workout like everybody else does? Because, well, you can't do that. Too much variety doesn't allow you to learn a motor skills properly. So blah, blah, blah. And then, oh, okay, I get it, right? So that's kind of like the approach that I used. And like, if you choose to strength train, you have to understand what strength training does. It helps you build muscle, helps you gain strength. That's what it is. Like, I'm not gonna bullshit you and telling you otherwise. It's always funny to me when you have a client coming to you, they're like, okay, I want to start training, but I don't want to get bigger and I don't care about strength. Well, go hiking, go surf. Like, why are you in the gym right now? So to me, I can't deal with that. They need to understand what they're here for.
Yeah, I mean, like delving into that a little bit. How much do you think like your environment that you have, with whether it's your parents being, both academics and professors, or whether it's working with Charles, is the reason sort of why you've got the way? Because looking at like back at my early part of my career, I've been on both sides of this, and it was only. When I first started, it was mortified to say it now, but my first sessions were more about advertising to the people on the treadmill than the client in front of me. And it's like, I've got to use a Viper because I haven't used one of them yet. I've got to use a power plate. And it was only when I sort of moved across into when I started working for UP that my mind, my world was open to people, like yourself, like Luke Lehman, and working with people like Nick Daniel, that I started sort of developing this thought process of more long-term ways of periodizing strength. And, I know that from you early on that bodybuilding was almost your initial passion. Like, what is it that made you go down the strength route as opposed to maybe more down the bodybuilding route, which is maybe a little bit less periodized, more feel based? How did you end up more down the strength side of things?
So early on it was bodybuilding, like just, the movie stars and all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to look like that, right? But then as I started going deeper into American football as a running back and started thinking about training more as a performance, what I realized is, and then, as I grew up, I understood also the backdoor world of bodybuilding, which, okay, that's why Ronnie Coleman is that big. So it kind of shifted my attention to the aspect of strength training that the training has more impact on, for a lack of a better term. Like, strength training can directly affect your strength potential, the hypertrophy. There's a huge lifestyle component. There's a huge nutritional component. There's a, exogenous components that can help with the hypertrophy. So to me, it was not something as refined on a program design perspective as strength and performance, right? If you want to improve your 100-meter sprint time, well, you can't just be like, we're going to work our chest and lats today and tomorrow. It gets way more complicated than that. There's like the speed strength continuum. Like, do you lack starting strength? Do you lack reactive strength? And all this needs to be intertwined into the planning. So to me, it was just more intriguing or challenging for my brain than just classic hypertrophy training.
So going into sort of like the strength training side of it, obviously there's a lot of the athletes you train, and that's a massive component of where your business has lied. And then you went more into there's a bit more general population, a bit of group training when you opened Kilo. Do you feel there's many differences in terms of the way you would program for an athlete to compare to the way you program for a general population client?
Not really. Like, to me, the only difference is the level at which you're taking the athlete's training. So, and what I mean by that is, it might be the same structure, it might be a lot of similar exercises, but it's the use of the techniques or the methods involved, or the volume or the frequency of training that will vary more than, because to me, the way I see it is, the human body is a human body. And then strength training is a tool to improve the human body's potential to gain strength, mass, or power. So now, if you're a Gen Pop, to what extent do you need to improve power? Not that much compared to the NFL running back. So I'll use the same tools if you want, but I'm going to push the level of the power equation to a much higher extent than I would with the Gen Pop. Like, the Gen Pop, I might never really touch power. If I do, it's going to be more for a kind of a change of pace, approach. It won't necessarily be to truly improve like a speed strength, because it's not something that they necessarily need. But it doesn't mean you can't use it. But I'm not going to do like eccentric hooks with bands and chains, as a contrast training with a Gen Pop. It's just not needed. But we might do chains. We might do myostatic 1 1/4, which is not too involving. It's fun for them. It allows them to, like, switch in second gear in terms of speed if you want, but it's not too involving to disrupt their training process.
I love the fact you delved into sort of the mentality of training in that, rather than just like the physicality of training. And I think I've always, when I've looked at sort of that comparison between the general population client and the strength athlete, I always think of it like, if you look at the bodybuilder versus the strength athlete, I put like general population clients somewhere in the middle. The pure bodybuilder would probably like to get strong, but he doesn't really mind as long as he ends up looking better. The pure strength athlete, the goal is to get strong, and any muscle, I'm sure he wants to look better naked on the beach, but like, or naked or on the beach. But I think if like his goal is strength, that any muscle is for that goal. And I feel that the general population client almost sits somewhere in the middle, where yes, their goal is closer maybe to the bodybuilder, but there's such a mentality factor if they aren't getting stronger, and how that will affect their nutritional side of things. And like I know with I had a client once who was beastly strong. You know, she was a 150 kilo deadlifter for like 3-4 reps off the floor, incredibly strong New Zealand girl. And I knew that like on paper her programs were probably not total geared towards a more metabolic stimulus for what she needed for her body composition. But I know programming slightly more towards the long-term strength aspect, if she hit a PB deadlift over time and she was getting stronger, she'd go and eat better. The times where she felt she wasn't progressing is the times where she might fall into poorer habits in terms of her lifestyle. So when we're looking at like the thing, I suppose it's the big thing about the difference where people compare when they look at strength coaches and like personal trainers, for use of a better term, is the impact of lifestyle factors on programming like you do. So we talk about like long-term programming. You mentioned about the training having much more effect with the training. How like do you find that people like who stressful jobs, poor sleep, how do you work around those lifestyle factors when it comes to designing these long-term programs for people?
Volume, frequency. I mean, it's so hard to, because the problem us as trainers sometimes is I'm ready to say that probably 80% of personal trainers on the planet at one point, they went through a severe type of bodybuilding diet, eating out of Tupperware 6 meals a day, weighing their food, which I think is an important process as a trainer to understand that part of the equation. So sometimes it's almost like, because we've done it as a 22-year-old trainer starting out, we think that the 37-year-old businessman with 4 kids will do it too, which is not the case. It's really hard to expect that level of commitment on nutrition and lifestyle with that clientele. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's really, really hard. So you need to dampen that a little bit. You need to simplify that. Maybe we're not going to weigh our food. Maybe we're not going to get 6 meals a day, but we can improve your breakfast. We can improve your lunch. We can improve your dinner. That's going to help, of course, but it's not necessarily going to be able to create an environment to withstand the training load of what you did as a 22-year-old when you were eating out of Tupperwares and you were able to change your physique drastically in 8 weeks, let's say. Like that won't happen. So you kind of need to tame down the training process and find a training approach that also motivates the client. And to me, in my experience, especially when it comes to body composition, I tend to use more of an aggressive approach with training, even though they're busy and stressed. Because what happens is the busy executive that's stressed out, he's less likely to commit to 4, 5, or 6 training sessions a week, but he might be able to do 2 or 3. But 2 or 3 hours in an entire week, I don't really care how hard the training session was. I firmly believe that it's not going to completely disrupt your entire, like the stress that's going to create. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But if during those 2 or 3 hours, I can train you hard enough to create some type of metabolic disturbance or to create some type of a energy requirement, then at least I'm helping the process of fat loss a little bit more than doing isolated like external rotators and mobility work 2 times a week and trying to improve your lifestyle. Like, because the problem with these clients, they're type A typically. They're coming to you, they want to lose fat. Well, if I use too tame of an approach, you lose them in the process because they're like 4 or 5, 6 weeks in and nothing has really changed. And then screw this, you don't know what you're talking about. So I tend to use a more aggressive approach in the weight room, knowing it's 2 or 3 times a week, and then slowly try to improve the nutritional aspect to try to help me kind of create a better change. Now, on the flip side, the other type of gen pop to me would be like a lot of my online clients are personal trainers. So they're motivated, they're not necessarily, don't have the central nervous system of an elite athlete, but they're motivated. So they're going to train 4 to 6 times a week. I'm going to use a little bit more of a standard strength training approach. And I know that they're going to commit to lifestyle and nutrition to a greater extent. So I'll tend to let the nutrition do its work in terms of fat loss, instead of trying to slam them with like density and volume and all that kind of stuff with training, because now we have time to actually build strength. And we know that the stronger you are, the more load you use, the more motor unit you use, the more motor you use, the more energy you use, and on and on and on. So in the long run, it's going to help you out get leaner anyways as you're building muscle. I'm not saying that with the type A dude, you can get to that at one point, of course, but I just like early on to, and by slamming down, I'm not talking about like ridiculous like training, but I don't want to be too conservative. I do want some metabolic aspect of the training session.
Yeah, and I suppose the aim there is to transition somebody either in a more sort of metabolic stimulus, maybe lower intensity, higher volume per session. If they get into the training, they're probably going to turn and go, "Hey, Steph, what can I do about my nutrition to make this even better?" And all of a sudden, they start to improving that. They go to bed earlier. Then it's like, okay, they start to become that almost personal trainer enthusiastic about their training mindset. And then you've got them for 3-4 years, and then you can develop them in those ways, I suppose.
Yeah, and also my goal with the clients like that is to make them become addicted to the training process, so that they naturally, without me saying it, they naturally start increasing their training frequency. And to me, once you're able to get someone to train 4 to 6 times a week, I think that's the best, because at that point in time, because they're active every day, because they're training every day, and now it becomes like a big part of their life, this is when they're usually going to be way more, they're going to be way better with nutrition, because you're less likely to go smash a burger, like if you're going to go and train, right? So it's kind of like this catch-22, where now they train more, they get more results from that, but at the same time, the results are compounded because their consistency with nutrition is even greater. So to me, that's always kind of my ultimate goal. That's why even with our group training, our unlimited membership was 4 strength training sessions a week and 2 conditioning, so that you're active 6 days a week. And this is when you really see people that really start changing, because now they're going to go to bed earlier because they have to train in the morning. They're going to eat better, more consistently. Maybe only Sunday will be like that off day, nutritionally speaking. So you're mitigating a little bit some of that deficit, right? That caloric deficit or surplus.
Yeah, I don't know if I actually got this from you throughout the years without even necessarily knowing it, but like it's this. I've always programmed a lot of cardio on off days, and the reason why I'm like, okay, what am I doing when I've got a client in front of me that's potentially stressed out, high blood pressure, high resting heart rate, can't really stimulate much tissue. I was like, right, I'm going to get the most that I can out those 3 sessions, similar to yourself, and then I want to prove an aerobic base. Well, if I can stick that aerobic work on their rest days, they're doing something active, something positive for their health every day that doesn't take much effort, like food prep might. And that one thing is like, well, I don't want to ruin my cardio session or my weight session. So now I'm going to eat better, and it starts to spiral.
Exactly. And that cardio, that aerobic work, it's like it won't disrupt the recovery process from strength training, because it's 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. So it's a great way to just keep the client like fine-tuned mentally anyway. So yeah, I love that approach.
So with like, I think this is going to be a big thing for like the people that follow me. It'd be half coaches that have followed me through my UP days, and half clients and people looking to get in shape and get stronger. I suppose like the big thing that you mentioned there is like you wanting to get people to fall in love with training, which I love, and that's always been a massive thing in terms of my business. So like you mentioned a little bit about obviously creating that sort of environment on the gym floor with a higher volume work to just sort of make them feel like they've worked hard. You mentioned having the off day stuff. Like what other strategies do you use to like make people really enjoy the process? Like, how would you go about making people fall in love with training?
Well, okay, so like I'm going to rewind a little bit to explain this. So just to be clear, by the way, like if with Gen Pop, if we're talking about somebody who's never really trained, right? Or somebody who hasn't been active in years and years, now I'm going to use a way more basic approach to training, which is very standard, low volume, mid rep type of protocol. And the focus will be way more on technique. We're trying to get them back into it, because the problem with the totally untrained or the people who haven't been active in forever is their ability to recruit motor units is so poor that even if you do a metabolic based type of training sessions, you're not going to get anything out of it. Like how many people have done GBC with clients? On paper, you're like, man, I'm going to puke doing that workout. And the client is barely sweating, not out of breath, nothing. That's because they're not recruiting enough motor units. So to me, there's no point going into that type of volume training. So instead, you do classic, very standard strength training with rest period to reinforce intermuscular learning. And what I do during that time is we're taking a 90 seconds rest, right? And now the client doesn't understand. She's like, well, after 10 seconds, like, I'm fine, I'm ready to go. And then I take that 90 seconds to explain to them why strength training requires rest period. And I also use that 90 seconds to start cueing them on technique and explain and giving all those little cues with technique on their squat or whatever it might be. And the thing is, what I've noticed, because personal training, it's such a luxury item that's high priced, it's typically a business type of people that have succeeded in their career that are going to buy into personal training. And these people by default are curious people. They're people that are motivated by having sense to something. So when you take that time early on during those rest period, instead of focusing on being metabolic to lose fat when they're not recruiting any motor units anyways, I use that rest period to really talk them through what is strength training, the beauty of strength training, what will a better squat do for you in the long run, why is your squat not optimal now. Like, and then you just get these clients a little bit more curious and motivated about what they're doing, and then it becomes one of those activities that they're looking forward to, and they want to see improvement in something tangible, that is their technique, either in the mirror or on a video, and that gets them really, really motivated, and it piques their curiosity way more so than looking at the scale or the caliper early on, when you know that the 2 times a week of training with recruiting 5% of their motor units won't do anything for that. So then it becomes something like, oh, I didn't lose only lost 0.2% body fat, and then they're discouraged. But if you switch the focus to technique and load, I find that you see people that are going to get way more into it. And as an example, like this was with a professional athlete who was a major league baseball pitcher. And I've trained him very early on in his career. I think he was 23 at the time. He was this super curious dude, right? Like he would always ask questions, like and deep questions. And then after 4 or 5 years of training him, I kid you not, I would go in with a new program, like we were changing phases. So let's say it's upper body. So it was like, okay, wait, Steph. So let me guess, A1 will be this exercise, A2 will be this exercise, the sets and reps will be that. Like he just nailed it just from asking questions and being curious for all those years. But that just shows you that guy, like he became consistent and motivated because of his curiosity and my drive of teaching him and make him understand the beauty of strength training and what it can bring to the table for you if you're motivated about it.
I love that, and especially when you're looking at the kind of people that whether it's the business people that are coming in that are more general population, whether it's the athletes, these are go-getters, these are people that are driven and passionate, and those kind of people are often curious about anything in nature. I remember, and this is just basically how I find that curiosity and learning new things like makes people excited to do more of anything. I remember I found a barber here in Hong Kong who started teaching me about why my head shape, why I have certain haircuts in my head shape, why my chin shape changes my beard. I'm like, I want to go back to this guy, because I never thought I want to learn more about hairdressing in my life, but I want to go back, and I've been back for almost a year. And I think there's so many things that you can do in a strength training session to get people that sort of like wow, like that is like, I never realized a body weight squat could feel like that. I never realized there was so much to strength training. And, like it's similar to, as a quote, I think it was Bruce Lee. You might be able to tell me this as well, but like when he first started, like martial arts, he thought a punch was just a punch, and then he realized that a punch was not just a punch, and then a few years later he realized a punch was just a punch. And like it's that ability to get that client to feel like a squat is not just a squat, and like that confidence. I suppose there's an element of the renewal there is the confidence in yourself to be able to give that awareness and give that education to a client, not be hesitant in giving away your secrets, thinking a client won't come back. Because in essence, if you make them love training, they'll always come back because you're always going to be one step ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And also a big difference between Gen Pop and the high level athlete is the Gen Pop, like for me to improve your squat, we can spend years focusing on technique to just improve your squat without having the need to go through extreme and complicated periodization or method use in order to push certain plateaus of strength, right? But the athlete, their central nervous system is so fine-tuned, their learning curve is so fast that you need to get to higher levels of planning and methods for them to keep progressing. So for the pro athlete, this will be what keeps him motivated. But for the Gen Pop, like you actually need more repetition, repeating the same thing over and over and over again to actually get results. So now the problem is with that is then it's not as cool, right? So that's why the communication and the teaching with that Gen Pop is almost more important to get them to stick to that, right? Because a lot of the best high level elite athletes that I've trained, what I've noticed with them, they're kind of like soldiers. Like they want to know, but just tell me what to do, and they just do it, right? And that's what keeps them motivated. And then to see new techniques and challenges that they have to kind of learn, that's what keeps them motivated. But that type A Gen Pop, they unfortunately their learning curve is not that fast. So the technicality and the teaching and is so much more important in my opinion. So that communication takes precedence to keep them interested through all the years.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. So when you're looking at, I remember you sort of covering this a little bit on Nick Daniels' podcast, who's a really good friend of mine, and talking about how training will develop as people start getting older. So just sort of like as whether it's athletes or whether it's Gen Pop, because obviously that may bring it a bit sooner because people may be a bit more broken. Although I'm sure you get plenty of broken athletes. How does that training sort of develop as people then go into their 30s, their 40s, etc.,
etc.? I mean that's hard. So like to me it's kind of simple in the sense that my goal is always to improve motor patterns, improve strength, improve hypertrophy on the basic lifts. Now, of course, as people get older, the recovery is not as great, or they might have injuries or limitations. So me, all I do is I regress the training to what they can do. So let's say he doesn't have any type of shoulder mobility whatsoever. Am I going to have him overhead press? No. So when it's my typical overhead press day, maybe we're just going to do incline. He can do that without pain. But then I like to team up with people, with specialists in the field, like either mobility specialists, manual therapy guys. And I'm going to be like, okay, so you should need to go to that guy so we can try to improve the mobility. So my goal is, yes, you get older, you have limitations, you have injuries. But my goal is I don't want to work around this for the rest of your training career. I want to put you in a position where we can maybe try to solve that issue so we can get back to the motor pattern that you used to be able to do. So that's kind of my approach. That's the way I look at it. I'm just not, I'm never going to be that guy who's going to end up just putting his client on 100% machines because it's safe and controlled and doesn't stress them. To me, that's not the essence of my job as a strength and conditioning coach. I just want to try to get you back to functional levels, even though you're getting older. But there, there's always a limit of, I get that. But at the same time, like in our group training in Huntington Beach, we had this guy who's now like 66, and he was doing the unlimited 6 times a week, would never miss. It was sometimes, like we laid away from chins a little bit, replaced by pull down for a month or two. And like, okay, we got away from barbells, replaced by dumbbells every now and then. But for the most part, like he kept progressing, didn't really get injured. His mobility kind of improved through time. So to me, it's not, I just kind of adapt and regress and reprogress. And that's how I see it.
I think the key thing there that you mentioned is getting people back into that sort of movement pattern. I know that through I'll use me as an example, because I've been very broken through bodybuilding for many years and working within those range of motions, and like going down the biomechanics wormhole. And I'm a huge fan of all the mechanics stuff that's coming out, and the RTS stuff, and Tom Purvis is a genius. But there's a lot of people now going into that without truly understanding the application of it. And I find that I remember when I first got people looking at me with this and go, right, he's not built to squat, his femurs are too long. If he wants to build quads, he's probably going to be hack squatting, pendulum squatting, leg press, leg extension. And while that may be true, if my only goal in life for the rest of my life was just to build huge quads with nothing else, but I didn't squat for years, like not at all, in any stretch of imagination. That when I eventually came back to a squat, my squat was considerably worse than the point I was told to stop squatting. And like now I'm getting back into it. I'm finding my weaknesses. I'm finding my areas of instability. And I'm learning to move better because I'm using that squat as not only a strength building and something exciting, but also just a gauge of how I'm performing, how I'm moving, and what I need to actually work on.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I always tell this to students in class. There's a lot of information out there in our industry, and a lot of it is right. It's always a context situation. So, like you said, there are some instances where, maybe squatting is not the best quad builder for you, and this machine would be better. There's no denying it if that's your goal, like you said. But at the same time, to say that you can't squat, okay, you can't squat to have the biggest quad possible, but it doesn't mean that you can't squat. Because if that was the case, why does Papua New Guinea, everybody there, like freaking work in a full squat position? You're going to tell me that all of them have the same femur length, the same like hip socket, but somehow they're all working in a full squat position? So, it's just a question to fine tune the way for you to be able to squat, the technique for you to be able to squat. And accept that maybe it won't be the greatest squat builder in the world, but I do believe that human beings should be able to squat. You don't necessarily need to have a 200 kilo squat, but you should be able to squat.
I think that comes down to the art of programming. What you do is like, okay, I may come in to Kilo and on one day I'm going to get on a flight to Miami and do just that. And you might look at my squat and go, right, this is going to be a lot of lower back, a lot of glute. If he wants to get big quads, then his accessory work is going to be more stuff that's going to be better for that. Or if I came in and go, I just want the biggest squat possible, I'm sure your accessory work would then be more things to build up those areas that I'm using to get my squat up. So it's not about whether the exercise is good or bad, as opposed to how does this fit in with the bigger program and the bigger goal, I suppose, in mind.
Yeah. So for example, like for me personally, if I want to, when I was playing running back, like my focus was driving my squat up because I noticed that it positively affected my performance. Now I still want to squat and have a good squat, but if I really want to focus more on quad hypertrophy, leg hypertrophy, to me, there's nothing better than extremely high rep leg press. That does it every time, and I love it. So I use that for that purpose. But I'm not going to be a very good running back if my primary exercise is a leg press twice a week. It just won't carry over much, So, I'm just not one to fall into the trap of like exercise battles and all that kind of stuff. When I defend my exercises, I defend them in the context of what I do. I'm not saying that, because, for example, I'm a huge fan of the high bar Olympic style squat. Well, high bar, I don't care if the bar is high or low. I don't care, but I'm a fan of the, the knees over toes and deep ass to grass type of squat, if you can get there. But I hate when people say, yeah, they argue and they're like, yeah, but you can't use as much weight as the powerlifting style squat. Yes, I know. I'm fine with that. I don't care about that. I'm just using the squat to create a better athlete. And for me, a better athlete needs to be able to be strong across in the entire range of motion at the ankle, the knee, and the hip. That's it. That's all. That's why I promote this. I'm not saying that if you're a bodybuilder, that's what you should do. I'm definitely not saying if you're a powerlifter, that's what you should do. But if you want better function, I think that's what you should do. And that's what that's why, like, the whole, like, industry, sometimes they just like to create little clans and stuff. It's just too much.
I think when you look at the industry, it's when you're looking at, you say, clans or camps. I think it's people look at what's different about stuff rather than looking about what's the same about stuff. Whether that is it's dietary methods, looking at this is different and this is different, where actually they all create a calorie deficit. And in the same way, when we're looking at strength training, it's like understanding your exercises are tools. And, like looking at, like, the primate stuff of the exercises you do, they will dictate how you then program for the rest of your program. They are tools you use to develop your system of long-term programming. And, like, the way you squat it's a tool. It doesn't, just because it may not be as hip dominant as a more powerlifting based squat, it doesn't mean you haven't got other stuff that will challenge the hip dominant. It doesn't have to be the squat. I've seen that walk through your gym and the incredible amount of posterior chain exercises. I don't think you're neglecting it.
No, but that's why I do deadlift. That's why I do conventional deadlift.
Exactly. So when you're going into, like, the programming over sort of the years, if you've got somebody, let's say we're looking at hypertrophy for sake of argument, I'm presuming that, your programming won't always be within this hypertrophy rep range. Sometimes you're going to strength endurance, sometimes you're going to more strength-based stuff. If someone's looking at, like, let's use gaining muscle as an example for this instance, what would, like, the rationale for somebody who's looking to gain as much hypertrophy as possible to occasionally go into a more metabolic strength endurance type of stimulus? Why would you incorporate that in someone's long-term strategy?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
So, like, if you're looking at somebody who's trying to improve his hypertrophy as much, there's obviously a lot of talk in the industry at the moment about being really specific in terms of the stimulus you're using for training. And I'm not quite sure the jury's out, because I do think if you want to have a completely neurological stimulus, the more fatigue you get, you can't completely keep it away from slightly more higher rep ranges. But if someone's goal is hypertrophy, when would you potentially use a more strength-based block in that program or a more metabolic type block in that program to help them with that? When would you move them out of a certain sort of rep scheme, like a 6 to 10? When would you go lower? When would you go higher if the goal is bigger?
So there's two approaches to me with the whole hypertrophy thing. So if you take someone like me, for example, where I'm kind of, I like Christian Thibodeau's term that he uses, which is power builder, which is kind of like, the way I understand it, it's kind of like that cross between like pure strength and bodybuilding, which to me was kind of like what Charles was kind of too, which kind of what motivated me, because I have my bodybuilding background, but I like the performance strength part of things. So to me, when I'm training myself, for example, I use classical undulating periodization, the way I teach it in my online courses. And the side effect of that is increases in hypertrophy and increases in strength over time. I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I still weigh 105 kilos. So it's not like I don't have any hypertrophy. But the last time I did an actual dedicated hypertrophy macro was probably 2011, So to me, strength training well done will lead to hypertrophy. But if let's say you're a physique athlete, the way I like to do it is I'll do 12-week macros dedicated to hypertrophy, where my accumulation phases will be very, very volume dominant to try to, in a way, improve nutrient partitioning and all that kind of stuff, which kind of like, as you improve that, it's going to favor a more positive hypertrophy response later on anyways. And then I switch to a macro cycle, which will be more absolute strength or relative strength base, to not only kind of deload from all the volume, but also to try to increase my base of strength to have higher levels of recruitment for the next hypertrophy macro. To me, I think it's the best approach, because I found that unless you're assisted, if you do hypertrophy nonstop, at one point you reach a point of diminishing return, because there's just so much volume that you can actually tolerate up to a certain point. And at the end of the day, hypertrophy is pretty simple, in the sense that hypertrophy is the net positive nitrogen balance. So you're training, you're living every day. Right now we're talking, we're breaking down proteins, we're building proteins. At the end of the day, if for me to gain hypertrophy, is that I have more protein synthesis opposite protein breakdown. But if my training is always crazy high volume all the time, the odds of me having a higher protein synthesis than protein breakdown is not that high. So if I create a high stimulus for protein synthesis in a mesocycle, but then we follow that with less volume, more intensity, now the protein breakdown is not as high. So now I'm kind of leaving more room for that protein synthesis, or that positive nitrogen balance, to occur. And that's hypertrophy. That's all hypertrophy is, right? And there's also kind of like a limit to how much hypertrophy you can build. So it's not like, if you can build hypertrophy with, I don't know, like moderate volume. I'm just going to use sets per workout just to make it simple. But let's say 24 sets and 200 reps, you build an adequate amount of hypertrophy. Then for me to go all of a sudden to 48 sets and 400 reps, it's not like it's going to double my hypertrophy production that phase. It's just, it's not that mathematical in that way. You can just keep getting hypertrophy. So for me, I'm a huge fan of minimum effective dose. So if we give something you gain hypertrophy with, then we slowly progress that to try to push the hypertrophy envelope over time. But I don't like to put all the bells and whistles at first, and then you have nowhere to go. Because if you needed 48 sets and 400 reps to gain 2 pounds of muscle, man, the next time I need to gain 2 pounds of muscle, I'm going to need to do 60 sets, 500 reps. So it's, that's the way I see it. But I just love that undulating concept of high metabolic type of training methods for accumulation, and then like standard strength type of training with a little less volume, a little bit more rest period, to kind of balance the whole equation.
Yeah, I suppose like you almost come in full circle a little bit. That will allow you to physiologically super compensate whilst you're sort of having the lower, sort of like the higher intensity, lower volume stuff. But in terms of going back to sort of retention and client enjoyment, I suppose having those very key defined blocks of accumulation intensification allows you to then go into a new block and explain why we're doing this, what the rep scheme is, what the goal is of this 4 weeks, and how that fits into the 12, 20 weeks. I suppose, like, do you find that model of using undulating periodization over daily undulating or linear, do you feel that it helps with client curiosity, client enjoyment, as well as that sort of like recovery?
I think so. I do like linear periodization in certain contexts, like shorter term clients, shorter term periodization, or kind of the type of people that they don't do well with changes. They like more subtle, consistent improvement. I'll tend to use more linear periodization. But for the most part, I find that the undulating keeps the client motivated, keeps him curious, allows me to train him longer without the client feeling lethargic or pain. or because especially if you use a linear approach with hypertrophy and a linear approach in terms of volume, like you're progressively always increasing volume over and over, like a 12 to 16 week period of time, what you're going to find sometimes is now the aches and pains are going to start happening, like in the joints and tendons and stuff like that, elbow pain and shoulder pain. So for me, that undulating just allows you push the envelope, you back off with volume, push it again, back off with volume. So I found that in my experience, you just kind of like prolong your ability to keep training without those aches and pains. So for me, there's just so much upside to it for the most part, for the majority of clients. Like I said, there are certain situations when linear is better. For example, like if you have an athlete for an off season in soccer, for example, and they only have 6 to 8 weeks to train and then they're gone, I'll do linear. There's no reason, no point to do undulating. It won't even actually work that well.
Yeah. So with that, like, you talked about improving like joint health and niggles and pains. Do you feel there's, when you're using an undulating model, there's ever a need, I suppose with your athletes where they're pushing higher volumes, maybe there's a need to deload, or does the way you program sort of account for that, as well as a new program and learning of a couple of new exercises do that for you?
Yeah. So the deloading, here's the way I view it and the way I kind of learned it in my early days. So, like Charles Poliquin learned about deloading from Dietmar Schmidblicher from Germany, and what he was explaining is every third workout, what the German did at the time is they would deload by 40 to 60% the amount of sets performed. So, and Charles, the way he would work with his athletes, he would have a upper lower workout. So the upper on Monday, the lower on Tuesday, the upper on Thursday. So the same workout would repeat over a 3-week mesocycle. So the athlete would have 6 exposures of the exact same motor patterns over a 3-week period. So that's why you needed to do a deload on workout number 3 and workout number 6 to avoid kind of like that pattern overload, compounding effect of repeating the exact same motor patterns. But the way I program, I do a upper 1, a lower 1, a upper 2, a lower 2. So there are different motor patterns. There might be same muscle groups, but they're different motor pattern, hence they're different motor units. So for me, now over my 3-week mesocycle, each exact workout is reproduced only 3 times. Okay, so to me, it's just not as drastic. And what happens is as you change phase, right? Because let's say I do an accumulation for 3 weeks. So my upper body 1 is repeated 3 times. Then the 4th time, the program changes. Not only do the exercise change, but now the purpose changes. Now it becomes an intensification. So it's different loads, it's different exercises. So week 1 kind of serves as an introductory week anyways, in the sense that you're reassessing your load. So to me, the week 1 of a new phase, if you want, it's kind of like a built-in deload anyways. So that's the way I see it. And then on week 13, once you've completed the 12-week macro, typically I do a week of active recovery where I like the athlete to not go into the gym, just be active, doing activities they like. That you have to be careful, though. I've learned this over time. Some people mentally, if they get out of the gym, you just lost them, right? They're not gonna, they're gonna be like, they're gonna become lazy real quick. They won't want to come back, and when they do come back, they're gonna feel lethargic. So with these clients, what I do is I still have them come to the gym like 2 or 3 times, but I do more of a structural balance, isolation, low intensity, 12 to 15 rep type of workout, just so they're in the gym, but I know that it won't affect my recovery, because I like that week off to kind of deload, if you want, the joints, because that to me is very important. That's the difference when you're a personal trainer and a strength coach. As a strength coach, if I'm dealing with a pro athlete for a 12-week or 24-week off season, I'm gonna hammer them with training, because I know that the other 9 months of the year they're on maintenance strength training. But when we are training, you and we're training intensely year round, all the time. So because that's all I do. I take walks and I strength train. It's pretty much all I do. So I need to make sure that I back off so I can preserve my joints, especially as you get a little bit older, past 35 and all that kind of stuff. But you just have to be careful with these clients that you might just like lose in the
Yes,
process.
yeah. I remember looking at like just a video that you did with about online training, and you mentioned that every 12 weeks you have this active recovery week, and how you almost use that to plan the next 12-week block, the next macro cycle. And I really like that approach, because it also makes sure that you now can truly look over the last 12 weeks, make sure you fine tune things to be able to progress the next 12 weeks, whilst sort of like I think it all comes back to here. And what I like about this, a lot of things we've gone into the podcast is almost bridging the gap between long-term strength training and the mentality of somebody that gets long-term strength results, and like being able to sort of go, right, this is what you've achieved, this is what you can, now you can have a rest. Some people, that is a fantastic break, but as you said, some people it could just be the thing of it's like they'll never ever come back. So it's interesting that you found that's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Cool. So like, just, I don't want to take up all of your day. I am pretty sure that you're very busy, especially with trying to find places in Miami and looking at what we're going to do from there. So I'm just going to end up with a couple of questions before letting you head off for your day. In terms of like, because obviously now your business is molding from working with athletes and clientele to more towards training coaches, strength coaches, and things like this. Where do you feel sort of like is I don't want to say mistakes, but let's say the biggest missed opportunities that you feel that potential people wanting to get stronger make in their own training first?
Well, I'm a big believer in program design and periodization. So I think a lot of missed opportunities is as simple as that. And exercise selection, I think, is a huge thing. I think a lot of people, they choose exercises, but without fully thinking about why they're choosing that exercise. So for example, if your deadlift is weak, because my goal with training is always to improve the primate, okay? Because they're your bread and butter. So if, let's say, you have a poor deadlift, I'm not just going to randomly prescribe a specialty deadlift exercise. No, I'm going to try to prescribe a specialty exercise that's going to help in your limiting factor in your deadlift. So if, for example, the pull from the floor is your worst aspect of your deadlift, well, then the deficit deadlift variations will become effective. But if you struggle at locking out and you keep using deficit deadlift, it's a great exercise, but it's not necessarily helping your limiting factor. So then for that person, I might use a rack deadlift or a rack lockout, because it's more specific to what they need, right? So that to me is something that a lot of people are missing the boat on. They're not really looking at the bigger picture of why we're choosing exercises. And that's why in a way, in my education, I call the A series primary, the B series assistance, the C series remedial. The B series should assist the primary. It shouldn't be just a random exercise that you plug in there, right? And then the C series, it's remedial. So remedial by default means to cure, to remedy. So that to me will be exercises that target muscles that I know are limiting factors for you. So if you have extremely weak rotator cuff, when I do my assessment, if you're really weak, well, screw bis and tris on Monday. I'll do rotator cuff and scap work on Monday, rotator cuff and scap work on Thursday, because that's your biggest limiting factor to you, right? So that's why I'm choosing this remedial, but there's always a reason to it. It's not just something random. And then the periodization to me is the most important thing for the long run, because to me, if you really want to get strong, but you program at random, and you're one of those that likes to go from methods to method, especially the Charles Poliquin followers. Because Charles would teach a lot of methods. So a lot of people are like, this one I'm going to do 6, 12, 25. Then I'm going to do patient lifter. Then I'm going to do German volume training. Cool, but you have to make sure that over the long run, the placement of these methods was meant to promote a positive strength or hypertrophy response. Because if you don't really think about that, you're just training to train, you're not training to improve, and that does nothing. And when I told this story before in a podcast, I think, but when I hired my coaches in St. Louis, I loved hiring coaches coming out of college at 21, 22, so we could kind of like mold them, for lack of a better words, to our methods and way of doing things. So I would coach them on program design for like 3 months. Then after 3 months, I would tell them, okay, now you're in control of writing the programs to your clients. But before you do so, you're going to do an assessment now. And then that gym, by the way, was all 1 year membership type of members. So then at the end of the year, you're going to reassess again, and we're going to look at the results. And they would write the programs every 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever. They would show me the program, and I'd be like, yeah, the great program, no mistake on your program. So then a year later, they would do the assessment, and the client would be the same strength, like nothing would have changed. And then you could see in their face, they were like heartbroken. Like, how is that possible? The client has trained the entire year, barely missed any session. You told me each of my workouts were spot on. How come nothing happened? Well, your workouts per se were spot on, but your periodization was complete shit, because there was no rhyme and reason. You just went from something that you thought about, that you read that day, to write the next phase. And then the phase you wrote after was completely disconnected to the previous phase. So there was no building on to the next phase. And this is very, very important in training. And to me, that's why so many people never reach the levels of strength that they should, just because there's no real thought in where you're going with the training. It's more reactive. It's more flavor of the month. And if you look at Olympic sport, planning is never like that. It never is. It's always thought out, you know? So.
Yeah. What I really loved in that story is about the way you sort of like taught your trainers coming out of college. You know, I've been very privileged in the 10 years I've been, you know, in the industry, that to be able to mentor and work with some phenomenal trainers at this part of the world and back in the UK. And I for a long time, I very much looked at education providers. Look, what are people doing? What are the people that are successful doing? What do I find that people are doing that are overwhelming people? And like, I often looked at the education system almost quite backward. I see a lot of education providers that are providing like anatomy. You've got to learn anatomy before you learn strength training. And then by the time they get to actually doing any lifting, it's all gone in one ear and out the other. They've completely forgotten it. They're totally overwhelmed and they don't know anything. And like I've the way I started to failing with teaching trainers and eventually, you know, becoming, you know, relatively okay at it. There's always room to grow. It's like getting a system in place first, teaching them a system, teaching them an understanding of how to work, that then they can take all this information that you mentioned at the start of this podcast of like, okay, this is good, but it doesn't fit with what I'm doing right now. This isn't good, and here is the reasons why, because I understand how I'm doing things. And like, I think what's come across very much in the last you know hour from talking to you, whether it's talking about your own system, talking about the times where you know when to refer out, and talking about how you teach your trainers, like, we'll do your programming for the first few months so you understand the framework, but then over time we just start to loosen the reins and just let you spread your wings and fly away. And I love that way of coaching, that even though some of them may have not have had that success that way, I bet you got much more success stories than if you'd spent a year just teaching them just pure science without any sort of get on, try it, learn and fail, repeat, slowly get better.
Yeah, I think it's important for the young coach to do it on their own at one point. And they need to do it and see it by themselves from their own perspective and their own programs to see the details. And like me, it was kind of interesting because my first boss, well, no, not my first boss, but my first boss in the sports performance world in St. Louis when I was hired there. So the head coach was Nelson Ayot, who he was the second in command to Charles Poliquin in Phoenix when Charles had his gym in Phoenix in the late 90s. So Nelson was the main guy under Charles, and he worked with him for like 3 or 5 years or something like that. And then he became my boss in St. Louis. and he would kind of do the same thing, right? He was like, okay, Steph, here's a case study, write a program. And I would write a program. I would be all excited. I'm like, I nailed that program, spot on and everything. I know it. He would look at it for 12 seconds with his red pen. Like, that's crap, start over. But nothing else, right? No feedback, nothing. So I needed to like bust my ass and try to figure it out. I would go back, that's crap, start over. That's the way I learned. I mean, it was kind of extreme, but what happened is it forced me to think outside the box and try to figure out on my own what the issues were. And I think it's an important part of it, important part of the learning process.
I have an almost very similar sort of story. With my early days when I first started as a junior at UP, and I was working under Eddie Baruta. Do you know Eddie?
I know of him, but
very, very stern Eastern European guy. Like you don't want to piss him off, sort of kind of attitude. And I remember I'd hand him a program, and he'd be like, "Why?" Point at something and why. And if I didn't know the answer, you just tell me to go away. Like no explanation, no nothing, just why. And like that stuck with me for like forever. And so I write a program, well, I can't say why for every single thing I put in, and a why in terms of how that relates to the last program. I'm not satisfied. I'll go back to the drawing board and work again, to the point now where I've spent a bit of money making myself a training program spreadsheet as a master copy where I can literally see 11 phases in one go, so I don't have to switch between tabs, so I could always keep an eye on what's before and after, just because it's just sunk in with me. And I think, as you said, it's like if I wasn't, yes, it gave me a lot of imposter syndrome. Yes, it sometimes like confidence, or am I not good enough compared to these guys? But if I was never given that, and I'm sure for you, if you never got that big red pen down, you wouldn't have become inquisitive in the same way. You wouldn't have become as driven, and you probably wouldn't have ended up getting to the lengths that you have done in the 20, 23, 24 years that you've been in the business now. It started with those moments of like, I've got to work this out. I want to unprogram where he doesn't slash it across with red pen.
For sure. And like coming back to the why, the why is so important, because like even with myself, sometimes with some of my top students, they write a program and I look over it and I'm looking at something that to me makes no sense. I don't get it. So I'm like, I would have never written that. But then I'm like, okay, so why do you do that? And then they explain it to me with their own reasoning. And I'm like, makes sense. So I can fault it. So I can put an X because he has an actual explanation that makes sense for him in the context of what he was trying to achieve. So I'm like, perfect. That's a great program.
I love that, and I think it's the humbleness of it is like to be able to learn from everybody. It's not this person's been a year in the industry and I've been 23 years in the industry. It's like you might have a why, and I go, that's really good. And then that changes the way that the whole business goes. And talking about long-term, talking about a lot of long-term client results here. Long-term, like trainer retention in your business is when a client, a trainer can feel they may have an input if they do well enough to your model, your primate model, because you might come up to them in the program and go, wow, that's really interesting. Let's delve into that. And it's because you opened up and asked that question that it can work both ways, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I have like a lot of really interesting students, and like one that sticks out to me is just because he's so outside of my world. But there's this one coach that he's kind of like in the movement, like the gymnastics bodies type of stuff, which I'm like, I don't know anything about that. But him, he did like pretty much all of our education, and he really likes it. And what I really like and really respect, he was basically able to take the Kilo system of programming and integrate it and intertwine it with the movement.
Yeah.
Which I thought was genius, super interesting. So that to me, I love when I see that from students, like taking things from other people, but being able to make it work for what they're trying to achieve. I think to me, that's for me as an educator, it's like the holy grail, if you want. But for them as a professional, I think it's just a smart way to approach continuing education, right? Like you don't necessarily don't necessarily to become uh, because I remember back like 10 to 15 years ago, like a lot of Charles students, people called them polyclones. Like they were saying, oh, they're just clones of Charles. That to me, if you're able to take things from people and make it your own, to me has a little bit more panache, if you want.
Yeah, I think that's where the why question becomes so important, because I think it's good to take inspiration from others. And I've been incredibly lucky, been blessed by having some phenomenal mentors that I've now become good friends of mine in a way. Luke Lehman and Nick Daniel and Jordan Shao, and we spoke about Eddie and a number of other people in the industry. And a lot of the work you've done indirectly is as massive as the way I work. But it's having that why question. And I think the word system was another word that, like, trainers always want to bash systems, but I like having a system allows you to have a framework of knowledge that now, okay, that student of yours that's done really, really well, whether it's he's had the movement system and now he's took the best parts of kilo, or whether he's used the kilo system and taken the best parts of movement, has now allowed him to create something that's uniquely his own, that takes some of the good stuff about that and be able to take the great stuff that helps with long-term strength programming to his clients that maybe are less mobile and less agile, and get them to a position where they could walk into a kilo group training class one day. And it's I think that's what we really want in the industry, where we often, there's so much infighting, going back to the start of this with the industry issues, and like there's so much infighting, where our aim is we're all trying to help a great amount of people, as corny as that sounds. And being able to see things like that, like it expands our reach, which is essentially what we all do this for, right?
Exactly, no doubt.
Yeah. Sweet. So again, I know we went off on a big tangent there, and I was going to ask you in terms of what you feel like the biggest mistakes you feel coaches make, but I think we've covered that. So understanding that long-term periodization is the some of the things that long-term coaches miss out on. You do a course on this, so tell us a little bit about the Kilo Strength courses, what you're doing in terms of your private mentorship, your courses. How can people learn more about you and your education products?
Yeah, so so far, like online, we have 3 online courses: program design, periodization, and optimizing strength ratios. So the way I suggest new students to Kilo to do them is in that specific order. They're kind of built as a progression. If you do optimizing strength ratio before you do program design, forget it, like you're not gonna get it. So start with program design, periodization, optimizing strength ratio. And these are kind of like basically the core key elements of the entire like training system that we have. And you mentioned system earlier. Personally, I'm a huge believer in system. I just don't feel you can be very successful for a long time if you don't have any type of system. And then we have live courses that are a little bit more involving. So for example, we have a hypertrophy training camp and a body composition training camp, where these 2 things are 3-day courses where you're training 2 times a week, so 2 times a day. So we're in those workouts, we're basically trying to show the student the extent at which you need to push in your training to get the results that you're supposed to get. And then the theory part, like we're like going deeper into the program design and periodization of these 2 entities, which I periodize completely different than the way I periodize strength. That's why sometimes for people who just read articles of me, but they don't really do education, they attempt to do fat loss workouts based on my periodization. It doesn't work that way. It's completely different. So I cover that. And then you have my favorite course, the sports specific training camp. That's a 5-day course. This is kind of like my, that's my career basically, that I put in a 5-day course. That's really fun. It's not really workouts, but we are in the gym twice a day. But it's more like each student is going through all the tests that I do with the athletes. They're actually doing it for real. And then we use the actual data from the test to plan the exact load they need to use for all of the speed, strength, eccentric, and isometric method that I use with athletes. So it's a very true hands-on not just theory. This is the test, and then you read about it, and then you go do it on your own. I know you're living it. Like we do the eccentric strength deficit test. We actually test their max eccentric. So it's very, like if you're serious about training athletes, it's a pretty cool course. And then we're working on building more live course. Like we have a specialty technique course where we're kind of reviewing a bunch of specialty techniques. But this, we're waiting for the world to reopen before we launch it. Because now in the US, people can travel within the US, no problem. But once I launch this, I want Canada, I want Europe, I want my Australian friends, Hong Kong people to be able to come.
I'd say add Hong Kong to that list, because I'll definitely find a way of getting across for these.
No, we've had a few Hong Kong students that came. So I'm waiting for this. And then we have like online programs that are more kind of like general programs on body fat, hypertrophy, strength, power that people can buy to just go through a program. And with the program comes like the explanations, the why the program, the detailed explanation of the methods used and everything. So that's what we have so far. Our website is kilostrengthsociety.com. Then we also have an Instagram and Facebook of the same name where you can get some information, little posts, little article links and stuff like that.
Awesome. And I can personally like vouch from my experience. This is, it's I have a specific desktop folder on my laptop behind your head right now that is Kilo Strength folder, which is so many of those programs which I've bought, the strength ratios book, the conditioning guide, and all of them have been a massive help in my training. And then it's definitely on my to-do list to do a number of these courses. So thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolutely fantastic, just over an hour. And good luck very much with the move.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.